Praise the Lord. The only thing that he left out and that I will add is I love the Lord as my personal Savior, which is the most important. And I have done so for very many years, ever since I was a teenager. You can calculate my age later on. You might be able to piece things together. With me, I did not come alone. Let me behave the way we do in the PCA church. I also attend church at the PCA Loresho Community Church, which is in Loresho. Many people look at me and say, PCA? I say yes. And I'm here with a brother in the Lord and a very good friend. I have known him since we were year high. Stephen Keuro, Bogwa. The interesting thing about it, when Pastor Mulika spoke to me, he said to me that he wanted me to speak on 2 Sundays. First of all, when he asked me to speak, I thought he must have the wrong sister. My sister's a pastor and was a pastor at the Nairobi Chapel or group of churches for about 14 years before she went on sabbatical. And so I thought to myself, this guy has the wrong sister. I went home and I told my sister, I got a message today I think is yours, to go and speak at Karura Community Chapel. She looked at me, and being the reverend she is, she said, no, if the message came to your phone, it is yours and not mine. So we communicated with Pastor Mulika, and I accepted the invite for 2 Sundays. And I will be preaching this Sunday. And because I thought I might be too monotonous, I have invited my brother to speak next Sunday. So we'll be sharing the pulpit with him, and I am glad. When I got the fact that you were talking about Joseph. Joseph, man, is one of those guys you think about and you see in the Bible and you say, whoa. No matter what he went through, he kept focused, isn't it? And one of the things that obviously he is called by one of his brothers is a dreamer, isn't it? In my opinion, he was the king of dreams. Because any dream that you had, the guy could interpret, isn't it? And so when we start off, in fact, I'd like you to open your Bibles if you have it with you. We'll just read the word very quickly, Genesis 37, 3-8. And then we'll go to the next bit, which is 9-10. The first dream that Joseph had is in Genesis 37, 3-8. So I'll read from NIV version. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, verse 5. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Verse 9. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. It looks like this guy never learned, huh? Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? So he has the first dream, eh? He tells his brothers. They hate him. This guy goes back and dreams again. Comes back and tells the same brother. And then he adds his father and his mother. Now, if you heard my last name, I come from Nyanza, isn't it? And I can imagine me telling my father that you're going to bow before me. So Jacob's response to him was typical of any father. Me bow down to my son? It's supposed to be the other way around, isn't it? Yeah, and his brothers hated him even more. And when we look at Joseph's life moving forward, he had lots of misfortunes and he had blessings. And I just want to give a little bit of a background as I skip through many of the chapters before I come to the crux of my message. And think about his misfortunes. One misfortune definitely was when his brothers heard the dream, they hated him, isn't it? And they hated him even more. They actually plotted to kill him. And it was just one of his brothers who said, no, let's not kill him. Let's first throw him into a well, isn't it? And one other brother walks away and comes back. As he walks away, as Joseph is in the well, some Ishmaelites came up. And the brothers decided, you know what, instead of killing this young man, let's take him out and sell him to these guys. And so they sold him. So that was his first misfortune. And even when, and the story goes, they went back, they found an animal along the way, killed it, took the beautiful coat that his father had given him, and then took it to the father and said, your son was attacked and killed. And as the story goes, Jacob was distraught, isn't it? So, we are back to Joseph. He's heading along with the Ishmaelites, and they get to Egypt, and they sell him to Potiphar. Isn't that a misfortune? Yeah, from a free man to becoming a slave. And so, he goes into Potiphar's house, and as the word goes, he had favor with Potiphar, right? Potiphar put him in control of everything. In fact, it looked like all Potiphar did, according to the word, was eat. Isn't it? He just ate. Joseph did every single thing. And as fate would have it, Potiphar's eyes, and we are described, we're given a brief description. And if you see all the movies that are done on Joseph, he's a very handsome man, isn't it? So we're given a brief description, and so she sees him and decides, this man looks very nice. It looked in those days, they did not have any qualms in terms of saying, you know what, twende. And Joseph said, no. In fact, the word they use is, he fled. Isn't that the other misfortune? And so this woman feels utterly and totally slighted and decides to scream and tell the houses, isn't that it? This man tried to have his way with me. He has even left his coat. So again, he's done what? He's arrested, and this time he's thrown into the dungeon. Misfortune again, isn't it? So he's come in, he's shown himself to be a good leader, and again, misfortune strikes. Then, as he's in the dungeon, he finds favor again with the head of the dungeon, the jailer. And obviously, as he finds that favor in prison, he's put in charge of everybody there. And as the story goes, in prison there were two fellows, a chief cupbearer and a chief baker. This time, it wasn't Joseph who dreamt, it was the two of them, right? And as they dream, Joseph happens to hear the dream, and he interprets the dream. In one dream, one guy was beheaded, right? And what we see is, no matter what the outcome of the dream was, Joseph just said it as it was, isn't it? Right? And he said it, and he told them, okay, first of all, he said to the guy, it was the cupbearer, you're cool. In 3 days' time, there will be a party. You will be pulled out of, both of you will be pulled out. You will go to the party, and you will be reinstated. And I believe he must have said, remember me, isn't it? When you're out there. And the other guy, he said to him, same 3 days, but it was a different outcome, right? And sure enough, they were both taken out. But the cupbearer forgot Joseph. For how long? For a very long time. And then moving on, Joseph is still in the dungeon. I believe he's still doing his work, and he's doing it very well. Then Pharaoh dreams. And Pharaoh had 2 different dreams. And nobody, the magicians, everybody. I can imagine him sitting on his chair saying, somebody needs to tell me what these dreams are all about, right? So one dream was 7 cows, sleek and fat, grazing among the reeds. And then 7 cows, ugly and gaunt, come out of the Nile. And they eat up the sleek cows. Imagine, if I dreamt like that, in the morning I would shake my head and say, okay, it's over, it's done. That was a weird dream. And we finished that story, isn't it? But I think the second time he dreamt it, it was about 7 heads of grain. Healthy, good, growing on a single stalk. And then out sprouts thin grain, scorched by in fact, they name it precisely, the east wind. Yeah, and I can believe in the desert lands, the east wind is a very, very strong wind. Eh? And these 7 haggard-looking grains swallowed up the 7 healthy ones again. And I believe by the second time, Pharaoh was saying, no, something is happening. And it was at this time that the cupbearer remembered Joseph. And he said to Pharaoh, I think I know somebody in jail who can interpret your dreams. So they took Joseph out of jail, cleaned him up. You can imagine how he looked in jail. And he was brought out and he was asked to interpret the dreams. And you find the interpretation in Genesis 41:33-36. If you think about it, the dreams were one and the same. Healthy, being eaten by weak and gaunt and whatever it was. And so he said, and I'll read it precisely. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. Basically, he was saying you're going to have 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. And he was telling Pharaoh, prepare, plan. Now, many a time we are told to plan and we don't. I think we went through it at the beginning of this year in Kenya when we went through drought. And at first, not many people realized that it was drought. Many were complaining, Nairobi water is not giving us water, until they came up and said, actually, the dams are dry. So even if you complain, there's nothing we can do about it unless the heavens open up. And so, as he told Pharaoh this, Pharaoh looked and said, now, who is this that would be able to manage? And they looked around and they said, since this fellow interpreted the dream, let him come. Now, another word for dream is a vision. And a vision, and I remember when I was speaking to Pastor Mulika and he sent me an email, he said, talk about vision, the ability to see into the future and stay on course and influence the outcome of your life, right? In the Bible, many people had visions. Joseph is one of them. Pharaoh is the other. We also hear of one other person who interpreted a king's dream. Who was that? Daniel. Daniel interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar, and the very same thing happened to him. He was raised up, right? And he's the one who then started taking care of the king's affairs, just like Joseph did. When we look at ourselves, how many of us dream in this room? Not the ones to go and sleep, and think about, yeah? How many of us have seen what they believe is a vision? Excellent. I love those hands. I went in and I looked at a dictionary definition of vision, yeah? And it says, over and above what Pastor Mulika gave me, it also says, a mental picture of what the future will or could be like. A vivid mental image, especially a fanciful one of the future. Many of us, when we think of the future, do we think of downtrodden? We're always thinking of bright success. Until things go absolutely wrong, isn't it? When I was a child, one of the things that I wanted to be was a lawyer. That was my vision. And my vision of being a lawyer was simply this, that I would drive a good car and make lots of money. There was nothing more to my vision than that. And I was a happy camper. And I remember my father's vision for my life was very different. You are going to be a doctor. Because in his vision, a doctor they're the people who made the money. The only place my father's vision and mine came together was on the money. Yeah? Nothing else. And then one day, I used to watch Vioja Mahamani, and I used to look at this and say, that's not the way our court is. They have really embellished it a little bit. Huh? I used to watch LA Law, you know, what was this? These other programs that make the lawyers look like they are so bright, and you know, they go in and they save the day. So that's the feeling of a lawyer that I had until I went to court one day with my mother. I wasn't the one charged. That's a story for another day. But when we sat there, the magistrate walks in, sits, and it is truly Vioja. And I could not believe that my visions were fizzling right in front of my eyes. You know, this is what I thought I needed to become. So obviously, between my father and I, he decided what my choices at Form 4 level would be, and I decided what my choices would be. And we went to school, and I said, because I need to honor my mother and my father, choice number 1 was medicine. Choice number 2 was law. If you guys understand the system, the last choice was BA, Bachelor of Arts. Which one do you think I got? And therefore, the vision for my life changed, right? I still wanted to become a lawyer. It began to diminish a little bit, isn't it? But the definition of vision is very different from the one that we see here, where you see into the future, right? Now, the definition that Joseph had is the Lord would give him 2 things. One, he dreamt about himself and where he was going. Secondly, he was able to interpret other people's dreams and where they would end up, right? And when you think about that, you also begin to think about what is the purpose of vision, right? In Joseph's dreams, there were no timelines, but vision always has a timeline. When I look at yours here, you're talking about becoming Christ-like disciples, engaging the world. There's no time like that because you are a continuous process, right? But sometimes visions, the ones that we see, and the ones that the God puts upon our hearts and our minds, have a direction and have a timeline, isn't it? And when you look at Joseph's dreams, you could tell that it was during time of harvest because those were sheets of grain, right, that he first saw. And his sheep was standing upright, and those of his brothers were bowing to him. So you would think to yourself, that must have been during a time of harvest, right? And then you look at the cupbearer and the baker. It was very clear, 3 days. In 3 days, this is what is going to happen. And in 3 days, that's exactly what happened. And sometimes when we get those visions or when we decide and we dream, we need to be sure about when is the right time to proceed, right? Now, when we look at the dream that Joseph had, was it the right time for him to go and tell his brothers, you will be bowing before me? Seeing as they were already at loggerheads, because his father clearly loved him and showed his love for him more than he did his brothers. So when he comes then and says, guys, I had a dream and this is what I saw, was that the right time? Right? Then on top of that, he doesn't learn. He comes back again. And this time he says, actually, not just you 11, but mom and dad as well will be bowing before me. And all of them were like, this guy, really? However, when the cupbearers talked to him about it, that was the right time because they asked of him. And they said to him, this is what we're seeing, right? When he then went to Pharaoh, it was asked of him. So that was the right time. For his brothers, nobody asked him. He shared, like most of us share. And then you think, was that the right thing to say, right? Secondly, it also gives perspective, right? When you do have a vision, and I know sometimes I dream and I sit up and I think, wow, that was a weird dream. And I'll think about it and pray about it, right? And see what perspective I have or what perspective I'm getting. Don't worry, my dreams are not as prolific as the men of old, but it still tells you this is what I want to do. And even when you're looking at the vision for your life, now I'm going to look at the other vision where you dream about where you want to become. What's the perspective within which you're working? Right? So my vision to become a lawyer was cut short. Clearly, when he gave you my profile, I am not a lawyer. Yes? But I ended up, and I looked and I said, okay, so now, when we were on campus, BA stood for? Bachelor of anything. On our side, at our time, it was being around. So you were on campus, but you just... So the guys who were throwing stones all ended up being BA guys. They happened to be around and the stone was there, and they picked it and being available. Right? And so when I looked at it, I went and I started sociology and philosophy. And philosophy, I got to study philosophy not because when I walked into the University of Nairobi, I knew what philosophy meant. How many of you know what philosophy is? I love the laughter. I studied philosophy because it had the shortest line. I had been at the campus the whole day registering. Then I meet a friend of mine and I ask her, "You're done?" She says, "Yes." "Why? How did you finish?" "I still have one course I'm trying to get." And look at the line. She said, "Madam, you see that line over there?" I said, "What line?" "There's no line." "Exactly. Go there." I said, "What course are they offering in that place?" "Philosophy." I became a philosopher. So I could go home early. But what philosophy did for me is it gave me perspective. It made me an analytical thinker, right? So whereas I wanted to accomplish so many things, when I ended up in the philosophy class, it made me start thinking about life differently, yeah? Then it also brings responsibility. My first year, I was around. We used to go to class and bring it, at least I went to class. Many people didn't. They used to Skype. And where I would drop my bag in the evening is where I would pick it in the morning, and go. But then I realized that I needed to become responsible. Life is not just about being around, yeah? It's about saying, this is the focus and keep to it. And so I said, let me be responsible about these things, right? And so I nearly failed, actually. I was very lucky. When we were getting our results after our first year, there were only two things. It was pass or fail, which means you sit for a supplementary, isn't it? It took me an hour as I watched people go and look for their names and leave, and many of them were dejected. They said they were going to look for their lecturers. I sat, where the fountain of knowledge is, those who have been to University of Nairobi. It has changed a lot now, but there used to be a bunch of benches there. I sat there for a whole hour with my buddy, and we would watch people go and come out, And at that point is when I had a lot of time to think about where I wanted my life to go. I couldn't be around anymore, isn't it? And so finally, after an hour, we went to the cafeteria. We had tea and daos and decided, kama nimbaya, nimbaya. Inside, I prayed. I told the Lord, I know I messed up. I didn't read as hard as I should have. Please, Lord, look upon me now. Show me favor. Just like you showed Abraham, Jacob, Isaac. You now know all the names, isn't it? That I was praying in my heart, and we set out. Luckily for me and my two friends, we passed. I found out later on that I literally just slid through when I had to get my transcripts. And so I decided I needed to take responsibility. And that's what the vision does to you. When you begin to see clearly where your life will end up, isn't it? You have to take responsibility. And then obviously, as I was going through this, I wanted to know, who do I share my vision with? You see what Joseph did, eh? Joseph shared it with his brothers, and those guys just said, this fellow, tutamsot, isn't it? Yeah? And the first time they must have said, let's take it easy. This is strike one, isn't it? But he comes with strike two and they decide, boss, that's it. We're going to deal with this guy squarely. And initially, their plan was to kill him until they changed their plan, right? If I were Joseph now and I was his sidekick, I'd tell him, boss, come slow. Don't say it at this time. because it's not the right time. Your brothers don't like you already. Look at the coat your father gave you. Are any of them wearing those coats? No. So what makes you think when you tell them, fellows, you will bow to me, they will be very happy and say, cheers, bro. We are happy that we will be bowing to you. They will not be. So even when you're looking at where you need to go, decide who you'll share it with. In life, it's about the people who will impact your life positively, isn't it? It's about going to those guys and saying, guys, this is what I'm thinking. I wonder if Joseph had done it differently. Would he have been sold into slavery? But I think that was God's plan for him. That was God's plan for the Israelites. That he would be a big mouth, and at the end of the day, he would bring salvation to the Israelites. Yeah? When we look at Joseph and how he influenced the future, visions influence your future. That's the bottom line, isn't it? He talked about the two dreams, and he said he foretold it very precisely. And guess what those guys did? Because Pharaoh was ready to receive, he believed, isn't it? He could not see any reason why Joseph was telling a lie. Now, if Joseph had interpreted Pharaoh's dream to his bros, what would they have said? Again, you're at it again. They wouldn't have believed that there would be famine coming into their land. And guess what? It wasn't just in Egypt. It also spread into Canaan as well. And so he told him, and then they listened to him, and he became a leader. Now, even being a visionary and a dreamer like Joseph was, one of the things we see every single time was that he was a leader. Okay, forget about his brothers, because his brothers couldn't see it. They were blinded. And sometimes even as Christians, we are blinded. We see our leaders, and we think, now who are you? You know? Most of us saw the nominations happening. Guess what happened? Many of us went and lined up and said, Tutam Toa, without thinking about what are the things he's going through, he or she is going through, that may perhaps does not allow him to do the things that you want him to do. Yeah? Or it would take a longer period for him to achieve it. But no, we become like Joseph's brothers. Who are you? Let's deal with him. Apa. Yeah? I am cognizant of the fact that I am in Kiambu County. So I'm not going to say too much. But we can see what happened, isn't it? And it's not just in Kiambu. It is repetitive all over the country. And the fact is, some of our leaders promised things that by law, they cannot deliver. I'll talk about Nairobi City County. There is a lady who was standing for MCA of Kileleshwa Ward, and she stood up and said, I will upgrade Kileleshwa Primary School to a secondary school. And clearly we were all laughing because she put it on a WhatsApp group. And me, I grabbed popcorn and sat back and watched the responses as they came fast and furiously. And the bottom line is, education is not the mandate of the county government. And even as an MCA, member of the county assembly, her work is not to build a school. The work is legislative, isn't it? So even as leaders, we need to understand, where are our boundaries? Joseph knew. He was given a clear mandate by Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to him, go out there out into Egypt and make sure this thing works. What you have told me to do, make sure it works. And so he did. And he was put in charge of the land of Egypt. How many times now is it that Joseph gets put in charge of things? This is the third time, isn't it? First time was Potiphar. Potiphar, just according to the word, ate. Right? Second time was in the dungeon. Right? He was the one who took care of everything. The jailer sat back. Third time now is with Pharaoh. In fact, Pharaoh says, he is the highest official after me. And he even gave him his signet ring, isn't it? So that was leadership being bestowed on him. Now, do you remember his dream? What did he say? The chief, in my opinion, would have been the fact that he'll be a leader. Let's not talk about the 12, the 11 yet, isn't it? Yeah? What he then did is he was an influence. And as leaders, we need to be an influence positively. Our leaders have, and most of the time we find that leaders will say they will actually try and play to the gallery. The things that you want to hear is what they will tell you. They will not tell you the hard truth. What did Joseph do? Every single time he interpreted a dream, it was the hard truth that he was giving, isn't it? He told who? He told his brothers. It was the hard truth. He didn't know how to sugarcoat it. He even told the baker, "You will die." Now, if I was the baker, or you were the baker, what would you do with the guy? You know, those are difficult things. Huh? And then he comes to the king and says, this is what is being said. But here is the solution. Right? And the king says, now, go ahead. As a leader, he gave the solution. He influenced how Pharaoh thought. Yeah? He was diligent and very persistent. He was determined. Right? As the story goes, he went throughout the land of Egypt until he had put together more grain than the sands in the sea. That's what the Bible says. And when we look at it, he didn't just speak. Many of us have visions about our life and our future, and we will speak about it, but we are not moving. We are not doing the things that we need to do to make it happen. Some of us sometimes will say, and forgive me for this, the Lord will provide. But are we doing anything to help or to take us to that situation where the Lord is saying, yes, move in this direction? Are we listening to him? Sometimes no. Why? We find it difficult to hear the voice of the Lord clearly amongst all the other voices that are talking to us. When I was on campus and thinking about, or getting on, at some point, I remember my father stopped talking. And initially I got worried because a little man doesn't stop talking. He always has something to say. But then he said to me, you're a grown-up now, you need to chart your own course, your own path, and you need to listen to what you want to do. I will not be with you. At some point in your life, I might go before you. He actually told me that, and I said, Dad, you're going nowhere. We are not talking about you going anywhere. You'll always be there. But the fact was, the minute he stepped back, then it became up to me to be able to decide this is what I wanted to do. But he did something very interesting. I used to go to work with him. Now, my dad was in sales and marketing. That's what you read in my profile. So where did I end up? In sales and marketing. I did what I saw in the house. Yeah, and it's about saying, keep diligent, when I decided I wanted to do this, I followed it. And I followed it very clearly. My sister, on the other hand, was also supposed to be a doctor. See, my dad tried with everybody. Yes, she was supposed to be a doctor, but somewhere along the way, she decided no. And the only person who told her, go with God, was my grandmother. Because my father said, I took you to school. You went till university, I paid. You went for a postgraduate degree diploma program in South Africa, I paid. Then you go to South Africa and tell me you want to come back and go to Bible school. What are you talking about? But she just said, Dad, this is what I want to do. And finally he said, if that is where the Lord is leading you, I will let you be. Right? And later on I realized after my grandmother spoke, she said, just think of Luo in your head. In every household there needs to be a pastor. This one is the pastor. This is the one given to God. Yeah? And guess what my grandmother then said? I had and saw a vision about this child. And my sister was supposed to be named a certain name after somebody else in our homestead. And she got very sick. Very, very sick. And in fact, my mother said, we thought we were losing your sister. And my grandmother came and said, I prayed, and the Lord has told me, this name is not the one that you're giving. You know how the Luo's name, according to somebody, if they die, blah, blah, blah. So she said, no, this child is to be named Achieng. See, it's not after somebody, right? And so she was named Achieng. My sister got better almost immediately. And my grandmother said at that time, my father remembered it years later, that this child will be a child of God. My father thought, cheers, yes, Christian, Anglican, good Anglican girl, right? But the Lord was very clear. And guess what? My sister ended up a pastor, not just a pastor, she's a reverend, actually, of the Anglican Church, right? So that was it. So when you look at it, if you look at your vision, the last part of it is this. If you follow it precisely, you will be fruitful. Because Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream and then followed through on it, weren't they fruitful? Right? If they had eaten like we all do these days, taken everything, sold everything, and then you're left with nothing. When famine comes, you're looking around and wondering, how are we going to feed the people? Imagine if that had happened. Not only Egypt, but all the nations around them would have suffered. And then this is where Joseph's dream comes to pass. Who came first to see Joseph? His brothers. But they didn't know it was him. They didn't recognize him. So they came and they did what? They bowed before him. Isn't that the fulfillment of a vision? Right? They bowed before him and they said, where we've come from, I'm paraphrasing, don't worry about it. Where we've come from, there's famine and we need to buy from you. And they came in, all 11 of them, and we know as the story goes, who got left behind? Benjamin. Later on, right? And soon after that, they then come back when things are really thick. He tells them, you come back with your father. And the father comes and the same thing happens. And it was much later he revealed himself to them. And the vision had come to pass. Now, many of us get stressed. We get absolutely stressed. In our human nature, when there's so much misfortune and you're trying to chart your way in a certain direction, what happens? We lose sight. Who got stressed at some point, but he didn't curse God? Job. His friends were like, boss, you're sitting here. Your kids gone. Your wealth gone. And you're still sitting here saying, all is well. If we were you, we would curse God and die. But in his misfortune, the one thing he didn't do was, and the whole book of Job is actually him talking, and his friends come, his wife comes, and he stood firm. And at the end of it all, he came out stronger, and everything was returned to him how many times? 7, isn't it? 7-fold. So many times we get into problems, right? And we are very quick to tell the Lord, this one, like Jesus said, take this cup of suffering. But you know, Jesus at the end of the day said, but your will be done. If it is me, I'll say, take this cup of suffering and go. Isn't it? As our human nature, we'll always be thinking, what is this? But what we have to do is keep faithful to God and to his promises. The only way we can know, and I actually told Stephen, I'm one of those guys who's going back to reading the Bible because I had moved and started using the Bible off my iPad a lot more so that I can actually go to, this is the reasoning I gave my sister, because I want to read NIV, KJV, NKJV, and she told me, really? I said, actually, no, it's just easier to carry. But if we read this word will give you the vision for your life. The things that the Lord expects of us to do. All we need to do is have faith. Joseph had faith. And I believe Joseph was like Job. He did not curse God. When he was in the dungeon, he just told the guy, remember me, the cupbearer. Remember me when you go out there. So he was faithful. So in your lives, even when you're looking at visioning, and now let me talk about visioning for your life. Many a time, I have always sat down and thought things will just happen. I used to think like that. Even when I was on campus being around, I thought to myself, when I finish my campus, how many of us remember this song? So many vijana. One person smiled, she knows. In nowadays, the end of that song says, utapata kazi nzuri sana. But that was in the 70s and the 80s, isn't it? Now we are in 90s and 2000 and things are very thick, isn't it? Yeah? So, the fact was, I was always thinking, this is where I need to be. And I got frustrated, right? So when I decided I was going to change my line and I went into marketing, I got frustrated. Why? Because I started my marketing career as a van sales rep. No, I wanted to be the one doing the ads that you see on TV. But I had to start where? In a van. And not in Nairobi, by the way. It was in Rift Valley. And my region was Maralal, upper end, and Narok, lower end, and everything in between. And the fact was, this was a Kenyan-born girl, but city-bred. Now you're telling her to go to Maralal and sell. The road ends somewhere in a place called Rumuruti. After that, you guess where it is to Maralal. I could have been and could have lost my faith. Many times I wanted to resign. Yeah, and then one day I got called up and I was told, there's an opportunity in Nairobi, come. Then when I got to Nairobi, I remember telling my boss very clearly, I want to be in marketing. Even about visions, tell people what you want to be, isn't it? Yeah? Even though we say Joseph was a bit crazy when his brothers were not on his side, he told them, this is what is going to happen. When the cupbearer and the baker came, he said, when Pharaoh came, he said, did he say, well, you know, tutaongea siku ingine, or hide the fact that? He told them. So I told my boss. And again, I get a phone call. I'm still in the van. I'm now slightly higher. And I felt good. I had one person reporting to me. Yes, I was a territorial sales rep, which means I covered the bigger territory and they came and covered the kiosks. I covered supermarkets. And I felt good about that. So when I was called and I was told there's an opportunity in marketing, I went. Yeah, and I had said to my boss one day when he was doing the normal appraisal, where do you want to be? I said, sitting where you're sitting right now. I became like Joseph in that regard. How would you tell your boss you want his job? In fact, when I walked out, I was like, wait, Anna, what have you just done? This guy will be after your head. But guess what happened? As he was moving up, I kept moving because I was faithful. We used to minister with these guys in the van that I used to drive. During the day, it had Lucozade, Ribena, the products I would peddling of drugs, the good type. And over the weekend, we went for missions. Yeah, and we would do what we felt at the time the Lord was leading us to do, right? And I had that van, even though I was frustrated, I realized that van was given to me for a reason. Yeah, these guys needed to have transport to go to schools. So we'd put mattresses in the back of the van. When we arrived in the school, you could almost count 1, 2, 3. But you see what? It was transport, isn't it? Right? And so I realized that at that season. And then I went to live in the Middle East. I got an opportunity because my boss was going nowhere. Yeah, so he came to me and he said, you know, madam, I'm still seated here. But I hear there's an opportunity somewhere in Dubai. Do you want to go and work there? I remember thinking, Dubai, the land of the Arabs and the Muslims, and I'm a woman. And I went. My faith grew in leaps and bounds when I was in Dubai. And the one thing I realized is when you can't talk openly about your faith, what happens? It just grows. In fact, the pastor in church used to tell us, you know what? I urge you all to spread the word, but please do it in your home. Don't stand on the street corner, because when you're arrested, I cannot help you. But guess what? The Christians were so faithful in Dubai that the ruler came and said, guys, build your church. And when we were stuck, we couldn't raise enough money, the guy came because in Dubai they don't like building plants that stall. So the guy comes and says, I've heard that you people are building a church that will house 7 churches. And he moved, and the call to worship came when he was in the compound, and he said, can I pray? And he was told, boss, please pray over there. And he went and prayed, and then he says, what kind of God do you serve that you open up your premises to anybody to pray? He finished the church. And now you can actually worship openly in Dubai. Not the whole Middle East, but in Dubai you can. But then for me, it was just one of those things. I said, Lord, I don't know why you brought me here, but you must have a reason. And then I came back home after that. And the rest is history. I now work for the county government of Nairobi, a position I thought, how do you work for Kanjo? Many people ask me that question, Then when I go to places, this one works for Kanjo, I get all the problems, thrown at me. But the fact was, I believe the Lord put me there for a reason. Everybody says, when you go to the county government, it is corruption everywhere. My office, I have prayed a ring around it. I am faithful. And I know the Lord has put me there. I'm earning less than I've ever earned in my life. But I know there's a reason why I'm there. Right? We have interesting debates with my boss. And I guess you know who my boss is. I report directly into the governor. And that guy, in fact, there was one thing I said one day to him, man, you know your word. Yeah, and that's when this one becomes very important. When he tells me something, I turn around and I Google very quickly, just to make sure that what I tell him is right. Right? And I believe that's the reason I'm there, for that season, where it is that a person in leadership, just like Joseph was there for Pharaoh, that I could be there for the governor and tell him, governor, these are the things we shouldn't be doing. We can do this is wrong. And he says, yes, go ahead. It's being put ahead of King's End. Exactly. So those are the things. But what you have to do is stay focused. I never thought I would be in that position ever. In fact, when I was running through the telcos, all of them, I only didn't work for Safaricom, right? The one thing I said to myself, Lord, what is it? But the Lord gave me wisdom, and he'll give you the same wisdom. You need to be able to say, this is it. If this is the vision, don't go yourself running. Whose hand will you be looking for? The Lord's. So that at the end of the day, you would be able to do his bidding. Yeah, and as I wrote there, God will give us the wisdom and a discerning spirit to interpret our lives as long as we remain. There I wrote true to him, but also in him. Just to end, and I'll tell you this, the reason why I'm here with my brother, both of us serve diligently at PCA, Loresho Community Church. And I remember when I joined the Gava, somebody came up to me, one of our church fathers, came up to me and said, now you are in a position where you can't hang around with. You should not be singing up here. You have to hold yourself in a certain way. And I said to him, boss, you're my father and I agree, but this is my heart. And this is what I would continue to do. So I serve in the worship team. And I have done so for many years. Right? And even when I keep laughing with my worship team members, that they come and tell me, people need to see Waziri doing these things. But the fact is, when I'm in the house of the Lord, I'm no longer Waziri. I'm a child of God. And that is what you all are. So vision boldly, right? Think about it. I said, when I started, Joseph, king of dreams. Yes, we all have dreams, right? There are dreams we get, the visions that are of old that I have talked about, but there are also the visions of where do I want my life to be? Can I be persistent? Yes? Can I, at the end of the day, be diligent? Can I be a real leader in the space that you're in? Whether it is in your work, whether it is in your ministry, whatever you're doing, whether it is at home, whether it is amongst your relatives. Think about Joseph's brothers. Oh, those guys were mean fellows. You can see what they did to him. But he still had to keep strong. And that is what the Lord calls us to do, to be lights. Yeah, and that, I believe, is when they said the sun, the moon, and the stars bow down before him. So we need to be those kind of people that can lead by our walk, by our example, right? Even as we vision as a church, let me look at your vision here again, becoming Christ-like disciples, engaging the world. Even as you engage the world, you have to be above reproach, no matter what. Amen? Amen. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for your word that is true. I thank you so much for your servant, Joseph, the lessons that we've been able to learn from him in terms of being diligent and persistent, and the fact that in his diligence and persistence, you blessed him and you made him fruitful. I pray, O Heavenly Father, that we also in our lives would be leaders. We also in our lives would be diligent, we would be persistent, we would be faithful to the things that you would want us to achieve and accomplish. I pray, Heavenly Father, that we would not tire of dreaming, that we would not tire of hearing from you, and that at the end of it all, we trust and believe and we have faith that we will be truthful. I pray all this in the precious name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.